Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Or, excuse me, from NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Will Robinson Smith will be providing our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We are broadcasting from our Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at KSC on Florida's Space Coast. Our Stephen Young is running the technical operations of the broadcast this evening. Our Adam Bernstein out in the field getting ready to track the rocket when it launches, also doing some still photography as well. We may see our other photography colleague, Michael Kane, popping in the live chat as well. If you're not already following them on social media, these are their handles on X, so you can check out their launch photography from this and other missions. You can find Adam Bernstein at ABurnNYC and Michael Kane at MD Kane Jr. I'm also on X at W_Robinson Smith. For T-minus 58 minutes and counting from the launch of the Starlink 6-38 mission. This is set to be the 49th dedicated mission launching SpaceX's upgraded Starlink V2 mini satellites, and potentially the first of a double header for SpaceX, as they also have another Falcon 9 rocket set up over on the west coast at Vandenberg Space Force Base, the Starlink 7-12 mission. We'll talk about that throughout the countdown here. The countdown clock is on and illuminated, as you see in this shot at the press site. Fortunately, a little bit hard to read just because of the brightness, but the clock showing a Northrop Grumman Cygnus spacecraft for the NG-20 mission. SpaceX's next launch, it's going for at least 3 this week. NG-20, that Cygnus, set to launch on board a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from over at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station on Tuesday afternoon at 12:07 p.m. Eastern. So very busy for SpaceX on the ground, and of course they also are in the process of overseeing the AX-3 mission in conjunction with Axiom Space. A Dragon spacecraft currently docked to the ISS, as the 4 members of that mission are about halfway through their 14-day stint before they come on back to splash down off the coast of Florida next weekend, weather permitting. If you'd like to help support our coverage of the space program, there's a quick and easy way to do that if you haven't already. Just hit the like button and click subscribe if you haven't already. Be sure to ring the notification bell. That way you get alerted whenever we do go live and we post new videos. So thank you to the more than 3,400 of you watching live. Glad to have you with us. And also, we can't do these broadcasts without the support of our wonderful channel members. So thank you to everyone who has supported Spaceflight Now with channel membership. Be checking your comments and questions throughout the broadcast and hopefully address those as we are able. You can also join in the conversation through using the YouTube Super Chat feature. That way you're not only helping to support what we do here at Spaceflight Now, but also adding to the conversation. We love to answer your questions or read your comments aloud if they are, in fact, appropriate to be read on the show. And just as one last bit of housekeeping on channel membership, includes access to 4K live views from all the missions launching from here on the Space Coast, discounts at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com, as well as access to member-only videos. T-minus 54 minutes, 47 seconds and counting away from the planned launch of the Starlink 6-38 mission. A little under 20 minutes away from the point at which the launch director would give their go for the start of propellant load for tonight's launch. For those who may not have been with us for a recent Falcon flight, SpaceX is now providing mission audio ahead of the final 5 minutes of the count. But we do have extensive experience in covering SpaceX and Falcon 9 missions, so we'll be sure to guide you through the count, talk about some of the visual cues to let us know that things are likely on track. We also have tracking assistance tonight from our friend Chuck Briggs, taking a look at his view here of the Falcon 9 rocket. SpaceX is running the countdown from its Hangar X site at NASA's Kennedy Space Center here, facility where they refurbish the Falcon boosters and prepare them for future flights. As is the case with the booster that is on your screen here, we'll talk about its extensive flight history as we get further into the countdown. SpaceX also has support from this launch in part from its control room at its headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Again, tonight's mission is targeting a launch at 8:10 p.m. Eastern. That's 0110 UTC for our viewers joining from around the world. As long as fueling hasn't started, SpaceX does have multiple backup opportunities available until 9:55 p.m. Eastern tonight. And if for whatever reason those don't work, they do have a window that opens at 5:39 p.m. tomorrow night. Do now have an update on the launch weather for this evening from the 45th Weather Squadron. The odds of favorable weather stand at 75% for the launch opportunity tonight, with the primary concern being liftoff winds. Another watch item for forecasters is the upper level wind shear, which they peg at low to moderate levels. If they do need to stand down and pivot to the Monday opportunity, the weather of the ground improves to 90% favorable for a launch here at at KSC, with liftoff winds also being a watch item. However, the upper level wind shear does increase to the moderate level on a scale of low, moderate, and high. So a little bit of a weather shuffle if they do need to pivot to that backup opportunity. Something we'll keep an eye on here, as it has been windy throughout our countdown. Taking a look at the weather here. That little purple bar that you saw on the weather observations, if you didn't have a chance to read that closely, it said observed 18 knot steady state winds both at KSC and at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. So again, it has been windy throughout the day here on the Cape. Had some clouds earlier in the day, but you see those pushing well off to the south and east here, as we see here on the satellite view of the Space Coast. Taking a look back at the countdown clock. Thank you, Stephen, for bringing that up. You see the American flag pretty solidly perpendicular to the ground, or parallel to the ground, I should say, perpendicular to the flagpole. So the winds, they continue to be whipping about, and we'll continue to keep an eye on weather conditions as we get closer to the planned launch. Again, as long as SpaceX has not started fueling, they can shuffle back in the countdown or in the window. I'll let you know if we hear of any changes to the planned T0 liftoff time. As it stands now, though, we're T-minus 49 minutes, 52 seconds and counting. Want to welcome Robert Stewart to channel membership at the mission specialist level. Really appreciate the support, Robert. Welcome aboard. As previously mentioned, then, Robert, like our other channel members, has access to 4K views of this and all the launches from here on Florida's Space Coast, discounts on our online shop, and access to member-only videos. Also want to thank Jeremy Ladd for his $5 super chat. Really appreciate that, Jeremy, who says, I'm a photographer and take pictures from my roof in Cocoa of every launch. Is there a way to send y'all or SpaceX them for free? I do it for my PTSD. Launch photography is certainly a good outlet to express your creativity and keep focused on positive things, as Adam, who's sitting off to my right, can attest. It is something that, you know, he and Michael are much better than I at launch photography, and they certainly have a keen eye for it. And I think, while certainly stressful to some degree to make sure everything is lined up and you've got all the timings right for every launch, it is nice adrenaline rush and something that they both look forward to for every mission. So to answer your actual question there, I can't speak for SpaceX since we are an independent journalistic outlet, but you can certainly pass them along to us. We'd be happy to share some launch photography. You can either, I suppose the simplest way is if you want to post it on social media and tag us, we can keep an eye out for that. So thank you for the offer, and look forward to seeing your photos from this and other upcoming launches. And thanks for the support. We're T-minus 47 minutes, 36 seconds and counting. We continue to step through the count. Let's go ahead and look at our countdown timeline. Let you know what's coming up, as we're now less than 10 minutes away from the point in which the launch director would give their go-ahead for the start of propellant mode. Again, because we're not getting mission audio from SpaceX, we won't hear that call out. But assuming that go-ahead is given, then at T-minus 35 minutes, fueling of the Falcon 9 will begin. Start with rocket-grade kerosene, or RP1. It's loaded onto both the first and second stages of the vehicle. At the same time, liquid oxygen will also be pumped aboard the first stage. T-minus 16 minutes, liquid oxygen, or LOX, will start flowing onto the second stage of the Falcon 9. Before that, we'll see the so-called big vent from the strong back. Happens as the feed lines are chilled, and prior to that second stage LOX load, comes up about T-minus 20 minutes, 20 seconds, give or take. At T-minus 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway. It involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and the turbo pumps, and protects the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes before liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong back retract begin, as the strong back, or the transporter erector, will tilt away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It starts with the clamp arms opening up just beneath the payload fairings, and then it reclines about 1.5 degrees away from the vehicle. Stays in that position until just before a liftoff, at which point it pulls back in a much more rapid fashion, clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. About 2 minutes out, LOX load should be complete. At that point, the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for liftoff. The engine ignition command will be issued at T-minus 3 seconds. And then, of course, if all 9 Merlin 1D engines are healthy and ignite, the flight computer will give the command for the hold-down clamps to release the vehicle for liftoff at T0, which again is currently targeting 8:10 p.m. Eastern, 0110 UTC. Now T-minus 44 minutes, 54 seconds and counting. We're now T-minus 43 minutes, 48 seconds and counting. Before we go ahead and talk about where this rocket will be going once it leaves the pad, dip into our trajectory talk. Want to thank a few more folks for their support. A couple of our channel members writing in with the YouTube Super Chat feature. Really appreciate that. Josh King with a $5 Super Chat. Thank you so much, Josh, and for your ongoing channel membership, who asks, how was your trip to the Johnson Space Center? It was excellent. I, for a variety of reasons, made the drive out there as opposed to flying. So saw a good bit of I-95 and I-10. Lovely to see the various states on the way. But the time at Johnson was excellent. I'll give my tip of the hat to the comms team out at JSC, running a very smooth operation out there with both the press conferences as well as the opportunities to speak with all 4 crew members of the upcoming Crew 8 mission, which will launch in late February. The exact date is still a little bit TBD, as they're waiting to see if the Intuitive Machines Nova C lander launch, which will be leaving from the pad you see here on your screen, Launch Complex 39A, depending on if that's able to launch on time during its window of a few days next month, will determine the exact launch date of that mission for the next crewed launch to the space station. But it was great to speak with those astronauts and the cosmonaut riding aboard, as well as the NASA astronaut who will be flying on board the MS-25 mission in mid-March. They're all a fantastic group of individuals, and we had some really great conversations. If you had to happen to catch our News from the Press site, the non-live version on Friday, since we were on the road, there's a little bit of a sneak peek of some of our interviews, and we'll have more extended versions of those coming up as we get ready for the Crew 8 mission and our more extensive coverage leading up to it, which will include our crew profiles of each astronaut. And keep your eye out for the member section videos, as you may get a little extra bonus from those conversations as well. So stick around for that. Also want to thank Mitchell Wilbur for his $20 super chat. Thank you so much, Mitchell, for both your channel membership and for chipping in at that level. Really appreciate that. And Mitchell says, the fellow that did the last liftoff did his best given all the problems, but good to hear you back at the microphone. I will back that fella, who is Stephen Young, our editor here at Spaceflight Now. It's always difficult when you encounter such challenging circumstances, as was the case with the dropped SpaceX feed, and there's only so much you can do in that circumstance, and so I give Stephen kudos for pushing through that, and you do what you can with what you got. And hopefully the next Vandenberg launch, which is set to go off in just a few hours now, will be much, much smoother. Fingers crossed. We're T-minus 40 minutes, 4 seconds and counting. I promise we will come to the trajectory, but I do see we have our friend Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions, who is lending us his camera before it shifts to tracking mode, taking a look at our big gas giant neighbor Jupiter there, the brightest object in the center of your screen. We have a view of 4 of Jupiter's moons tonight. Starting from the top and working our way down, we have Callisto. Then closest to Jupiter there, from our vantage point this evening, is Io. A little bit farther down is Ganymede. And finally, but certainly not least of all, is Europa, the destination of the forthcoming Europa Clipper mission, which is set to launch aboard a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket in October of this year. So certainly looking forward to that flight. Also launching from the pad you see here on your screen, Launch Complex 39A. And it'll be reusing the side boosters that launched another NASA mission, that being the Psyche spacecraft, which actually passed 100 days in its mission this past week. Primary investigator of that spacecraft and that mission, Lindy Elkins-Tanton, reports that all is going well and checkouts continue to move smoothly, so we certainly wish continued success on the Psyche mission and all of its endeavors, as it's making a very long trek out to the asteroid 16 Psyche. Should be reaching there not for quite some time, about 2029 by the time it actually makes its way out to its destination. We're at T-minus 38 minutes, 8 seconds and counting, just a few seconds away from the point at which the launch director will give their go-ahead if they are ready for the start of propellant load. Again, we will not hear that call out, but if they do go ahead and give that nod, fueling will begin at T-minus 35 minutes. And as we await word from SpaceX for signs of fueling, teased it out long enough, let's go ahead and talk trajectory, shall we? As you can see there in the live pictures on the right-hand side of your screen, this is Launch Complex 39A. The Falcon 9 will be lifting off from this pad at the planned time of 8:10 p.m. Eastern, 0110 UTC. It'll fly in a southeasterly trajectory out towards the Caribbean. Following stage separation, the first stage will land on one of SpaceX's 3 drone ships. The one on deck tonight is a shortfall of gravitas. It's been a while since we've had Just Read the Instructions in the mix. That has been down for some maintenance up in the Carolinas. We'll be looking forward to its return at some point in the next little bit here. Or actually, it may be back now, just hasn't been put back into rotation quite yet. So we may see it sooner rather than later. Of course, the upper stage will continue on with the Starlink satellites, moving further down from the vantage point of this map. SpaceX will be recovering the 2 fairing halves used to support this mission. It is 2 recovery vessels that it uses to do so here on the Space Coast. Tonight, the one on deck that they have is Bob. It and the other recovery vessel, Doug, of course, named after the 2 former NASA astronauts, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, who flew aboard the Demo 2 mission back on May 30th, 2020, kicking the aforementioned Commercial Crew program into high gear. We're now T-minus 35 minutes, 32 seconds and counting. Coming up on the probable start of propellant load, assuming all is continuing to move nominally here. We're now T-minus 34 minutes, 15 seconds and counting. We are waiting to hear official word from SpaceX if, in fact, fueling has begun. We're taking a close look at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket to see some signs of vapor, which would indicate that fueling is in fact underway. So you can see a little bit of bounce from our camera tonight. As I mentioned, it is a windy evening here on Florida's Space Coast. T-minus 32 minutes, 12 seconds and counting. Starting to see a little bit of vapor form near the base of the Falcon 9 rocket. You can see it start to form a little bit of a ring, and now, yeah, the vapors are much more pronounced. If you look where the transporter erector, the base there, comes up to the end of its tapering and begins to go straight vertically up and down, just to the left of that, you can see that's where that vapor ring is starting to form, as both the RP-1 and the liquid oxygen are now flowing aboard at the first stage. That rocket-grade kerosene also being loaded on board the second stage of the Falcon 9. T-minus 31 minutes, 16 seconds and counting. We certainly appreciate the more than 6,500 of you that are joining us for our live coverage this evening. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you consider hitting the like button. It'll allow the YouTube algorithm to do its thing and bring this live coverage to more folks as we come up on the final 30 minutes before the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. And coming up at T-minus 30 minutes will be the start of helium loading onto the pressure vessels on the first stage. Cryogenic helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. The same will be true when we hit T-minus 25 minutes. They'll be loaded on to pressure tanks for the second stage. We're now T-minus 28 minutes, 25 seconds and counting. Seeing a lot more vapor forming along the edge of the Falcon 9 vehicle. Getting some good visual indication that fueling is in fact underway. And also now seeing word from SpaceX that they are under 30 minutes from the planned launch of this mission. So that is another good affirmation that things are on track for the launch tonight. The first of what SpaceX hopes to be a doubleheader of Falcon 9 launches. I want to thank a few more folks for their support as we continue on through the count. I want to thank Shell Bell for a $5 super chat. Really appreciate that, Shell Bell. Bob Witter, one of our channel members, also with a $5 super chat, saying thanks to all you do, Will. Well, I will spread that thanks on to the rest of the Spaceflight Now team. Does very much take a village to make all this happen. So appreciate working with such an amazing group of folks here. Thanks to Andrew Geach for a £2 super chat. Thank you so much, Andrew, who says hello all from the UK. And hello to you from the States. One of our channel members, Callistia Lee, with a very generous $20 super chat. Thank you, Callistia. Good to see you this evening. Who says, Mr. Young did a great job. Agreed. We certainly missed you, Will. Well, that's very kind to say. Glad you had a good trip. And yes, it was an excellent trip to JSC. Definitely look forward to making my way back to Houston at some point this year. Thanks also to Omar for a £5 super chat. We're back again saying, me again, love these streams. Seeing Jupiter and its moons is amazing. Yeah, thanks to our friend Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions for helping with that. Says, it's a shame I won't see space travel in my lifetime. Lots of love from the UK. I'm assuming that means you yourself won't be traveling to space in your lifetime. Well, you know, never say never. I'm sure some of the folks who flew aboard the Inspiration 4 mission back in 2021 never thought that they would have the opportunity to go to space, and they spent a few days on orbit. So you never know what opportunities life will present you. And as mentioned, there's our view of Jupiter back, with the exposure adjusted, so we're seeing some of the bands across the gas giant Jupiter. Appreciate that, Pete. Thank you for that view. Thanks also to Kellen526 for our $5 super chat. And thumbs up Corky, my favorite. Thanks, Kellen. We're T-minus 25 minutes, 17 seconds and counting. Again, coming up on the start of that cryogenic helium being loaded on board the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. Now T-minus 24 minutes, 8 seconds and counting. A little less than 4 minutes away from the start of the big vent here. Fueling continues to move along smoothly. Our thanks to Jesse Mason for a $10 super chat. Thank you, Jesse, and for being a channel member as well. Making an apropos point that we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge today, January 28th, of course, the date 38 years ago that we lost the crew of STS-51L in the Challenger disaster. The day before, also the anniversary of the Apollo 1 fire that killed that 3-member crew as they were going through training, and coming up on the anniversary of the Columbia disaster as well. NASA marking, as they do every year, this trio of tragedies with their National Day of Remembrance, a moment to pause and reflect and make note of those who we've lost in the pursuit of space exploration, and to make sure that we both never forget those crew members that we lost, but also to maintain constant vigilance in the pursuit of both safety in flight as well as in all of the aspects that lead up to a mission, making sure that the timeline of a launch is not first and foremost in the minds, but the safety of all those participating, especially in a crew mission, those on board. So thank you, Jesse, for your support and for making sure that we all hold a kind thought for the friends and family of the Challenger STS-51L crew. We're now T-minus 21 minutes, 36 seconds and counting. We're now T-minus 20 minutes, 23 seconds and counting, as we see the start of the big vent there, as the feed lines are chilled along the strong back in preparation for LOX load, the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. Another good visual indication that fueling remains on track for tonight's planned launch of the Starlink 6-38 mission from NASA's Kennedy Space Center. We're now T-minus 17 minutes, 33 seconds and counting. We are closing in on the end of the big vent here. So we're preparing for the start of LOX load on the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. As we get ready to wrap this up in the next about 30 seconds or so. I want to thank a few more folks for their support this evening. One of our wonderful channel members, I Am Letta, with a $2 super chat. Thank you so much, Letta, who says, the best coverage and commentary. Love being here. Well, thank you so much. We love the community that supports us here at Spaceflight Now. Love seeing all the vibrant conversations happening in the live chat. Keith Beal with a $2 super chat of support. Thank you so much, Keith. Really appreciate that. Matthew Lowry with a $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Matthew, who says, great info as always. Sending thanks to the three of you. Appreciate that as we see the big vent wrapping up here. Griffin B with a $10 super chat. Thank you so much, Griffin B, who says, great coverage as always. Well, thank you so much for supporting it. Really appreciate that. Chris Stallings with a $5 super chat, saying, go Falcon, go Dogs. And finally, for now, Luis Culp with a $5 super chat, who says, love to watch these launches from North Carolina. Well, thank you so much for the support, Luis. And if the weather holds up, we should see a good opportunity for you to catch the launch of the Cygnus spacecraft, as that will be heading in a northeasterly trajectory along the coast. We're now at T-minus 13 minutes, 53 seconds and counting. Let's go ahead and talk about the vehicle that will be launching this Starlink 6-38 mission in just a little under 14 minutes now. The Falcon 9 rocket, the SpaceX workhorse vehicle, standing 70 meters or 229 feet tall. It has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. Most of that is made up by the first stage, the bottom two-thirds of the rocket. This particular booster has flown 17 times before, looking to become one of SpaceX's 18 flight boosters with the completion of this mission. This is tail number 1062 in the SpaceX fleet. At the base of the first stage are 9 Merlin engines. You see them there in the inside image on the right-hand side of your screen. They burn rocket-grade kerosene, or RP-1, and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment, you see also the black carbon fiber landing legs that are used to land on either back at landing zone 1 or 2, or in this case tonight, on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas. Above the first stage is the inner stage. It's a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. Taking a look at that image on the right-hand side, you could see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These titanium winglets provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere like a big old dart heading towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the second stage. At first stage main engine cutoff, high-pressure helium is used to release those lashes, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. The second stage engine nozzle is also safely housed inside the inner stage until stage separation. Speaking of that upper stage, second stage is powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVAC engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle, which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, and it produces more than 200,000 pounds of thrust. It'll be fired twice on today's flight to place the 23 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. The MVAC engine burns the same propellant mix as the first stage, RP1 and LOX. And of course, it will ignite a third time after it deploys the Starlink satellites for a deorbit burn, driving the upper stage back into the atmosphere, where it will burn up, helping to eliminate the risk of any unnecessary space debris on this mission. Finally, at the very top are the payload fairings housing the 23 Starlink satellites. Payload fairings are made up of a carbon composite material. They're 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall and 5.2 meters or 17 feet in diameter. The 2 halves of the payload fairings will be recovered by the recovery vessel. Again, they're using Bob tonight. They gently splash down under parachutes. And same with the Falcon 9 first stage booster. They will be brought back to Port Canaveral, where they will be turned around and refurbished and prepared for a future flight. T-minus 10 minutes, 11 seconds and counting. Here's an image that SpaceX shared recently of one of those parachute descending payload fairings. This reuse allows, as SpaceX has stated, millions per recovery in cost savings. And as of the start of 2024, they've reflown fairings more than 300 times. This is what it looks like when they're bringing one of those payload fairings on board a recovery vessel. At the time the fairing being hoisted in this picture was being recovered for the 13th time. We're now T-minus 9 minutes, 23 seconds and counting. You can see that venting from the second stage now as super cold liquid oxygen has been flowing on board there now for several minutes. Now T-minus 8 minutes, 5 seconds and counting. As mentioned, we are continuing to keep an eye on the weather this evening, as we always do for every launch. Taking a closer look at the Falcon 9 vehicle, you see the vapor trailing off almost perpendicularly to the vehicle. Do have word that a strong wind warning has been issued. calling for winds of 25 knots, gusting to 35 knots for both NASA's Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Liftoff winds were a watch item coming into tonight's launch, as previously mentioned from the 45th Weather Squadron. There's a 75% odds of favorable weather for liftoff, but the liftoff winds were the lone watch item. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that as we get closer to the planned liftoff. For now, let's talk about the booster history with this vehicle, because it has quite an extensive one, going for its 18th flight tonight. Now less than 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines is underway on the Falcon 9 vehicle. So while we still have time, let's go through the history of this Falcon 9 first stage booster. Tail number 1062. The dates associated with this launch history are based off of the launch times in Universal Coordinated Time, or UTC. So just as a bit of housekeeping before we step through. Starting off November 5th of 2020, this first launch saw the send up of the GPS-3 space vehicle, or SV number 4. Built by Lockheed Martin, this was the fourth of the newer version of the U.S. Space Force's GPS constellation, each named after a famous explorer. This particular satellite had the nickname of Sacagawea, named after the Shoshone woman who guided Lewis and Clark on their expeditions in the 1800s. Another GPS satellite, number 5, was on deck back on June 17th, 2021. That GPS satellite, named for the first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong. The third flight was on September 15th, 2021. Of course, this was the Inspiration 4 mission, the first all-civilian crew to fly to orbit on board the Crew Dragon Resilience. The fourth launch, coming on January 6th, 2022. This was the first Starlink launch for this booster, 4-5, with 49 version 1.5 satellites on board. The fifth launch came on April 8th, 2022. This was the second crewed mission for this booster, when it launched the Crew Dragon Endeavour and the Axiom 1 private astronauts to the International Space Station. As a point of note, where we are on the count, we're T-minus 4 minutes 30 seconds and counting. At this point, the Strongback retract sequence should be getting underway, if all remains on target for a launch tonight. However, just want to note that the SpaceX feed has not begun yet, which could be an indication that the liftoff winds may be too much for this launch tonight. We're going to go ahead and pause our recounting of the booster history and punch in a little closer on the Falcon 9 rocket. Again, at this point in the count, SpaceX should have brought up its views of the rocket with mission audio. But we do see, looks like the strong back retract sequence is underway here. we may in fact still be on track for the launch tonight. Just making some adjustments here to be able to see as clearly as possible. Now coming up on 2 minutes nominally before the planned liftoff. We're now under 2 minutes to the planned liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket for the Starlink 6-38 mission. We're seeing the venting we would normally see around the time we hear the call out for ground gas closeouts. We're coming up on the point in which the Falcon 9 would be fully fueled with 1 million pounds of propellant. SpaceX appears to have brought the video back, so we are now under 40 seconds planned liftoff. And we did hear that call out that we are go for launch, so things are in fact on track. Less than 30 seconds to the planned liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket. 20 seconds. 15 seconds. And 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. And liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket supporting the Starlink 6-38 mission. The vehicle has cleared the tower. The first of what is poised to be a SpaceX doubleheader, now well on its way. We're now 30 seconds into flight. Let's listen to the roar of those 9 Merlin engines. Now coming up on a minute into flight. Falcon 9 supersonic, traveling faster than the speed of sound. Getting some great tracking views. This view from our cameras here at the press site. This from Pete Carson's with Max Q Productions as the vehicle is passing through Max Q. The point is of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Coming up on MVAC chill down, where they thermally condition the Merlin. You hear that call out? They're thermally conditioning the MVAC engine ahead of its planned ignition. As the clouds have cleared away, we're getting some great clear tracking views from our team here. You just saw Pete. This is Chuck. Pete again. Now over 2 minutes into flight, we're approaching main engine cutoff or MECO. The 9 Merlin engines will shut down, followed by stage separation and the ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine, with the jettison of the payloads coming up shortly thereafter. And you see Miko there, stage separation. And ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine. You can see a little bit of the glint of that first stage booster as it fell away. Before the engine ignites, you can see the Space Coast and the delayed SpaceX views. The bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Coming up on fairing separation in just a few seconds. You see those payload fairings falling away in Pete's live views. We'll see the same thing in the SpaceX feed momentarily. And there you see those Starlink satellites now exposed to the vacuum of space for the first time. Well, not quite the sunset launch we were hoping to see tonight. Still getting some pretty brilliant color. The Merlin vacuum engine continues to power the second stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. That first stage, tail number B1062, starting to make its way back down towards the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. We're now T plus 4 minutes, 7 seconds and counting into the flight. Coming up next will be the first stage entry burn, which will last 23 seconds, starting at T plus 6 minutes and 10 seconds, a little under 2 minutes from now. Now coming up on 5 minutes into flight.
Both vehicles continue to follow a nominal trajectory.
Very good call out from SpaceX as the flight continues to move along nominally, a little over 5 minutes into this mission. We're now less than a minute away from the first stage entry burn beginning. We're shifting away from Pete for just a moment as he's getting a position to hopefully be able to get a glimpse of that entry burn. We'll come back to him in just a few seconds.
Both stages are on a nominal trajectory.
That entry burn coming up in about 4 seconds. And there you see that entry burn beginning. Our friend Pete Carstens.
Stage 1 FTSS saved.
Getting this brilliant 23-second burn now. Seeing that begin on the SpaceX feed as well.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
With that entry burn wrapped up, the next milestones are going to be far enough away
FTSS saved.
and low enough on the horizon that unfortunately we won't be able to see them with our ground cameras, so we'll be relying on SpaceX's onboard views at this point. We're now 7 minutes into this flight. Coming up, our next milestone will be the landing burn.
Both vehicles are following.
Entry burn shutdown.
It's the Falcon 9 first stage booster coming back down. Although Pete looks like, well, just fallen out of frame, but did have the Merlin vacuum engine continuing on its burn. And he's got it back now. Well done, Pete. A little over 7.5 minutes into flight. Coming up on that landing burn, which will begin at 8:05 minutes into flight.
Stage 1 transonic.
Just as a bit of housekeeping, our countdown clock, or our mission clock, is in real time. SpaceX running about 10 or so seconds behind, which is why you're seeing these events happen first on our views and then on the SpaceX feed.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing burn.
You see that landing burn now underway. Coming up, we'll see the drone ship should be appearing on the right-hand side. There we go.
Stage 1 landing light deploy.
And touchdown.
Stage 1 landing confirmed.
Booster 1062 now joining the 18 Launch and Landing Club. Coming up closer and closer to the
back shutdown.
milestone set previously by the now former booster 1058, which had notched 19 flights.
No. Insertion.
And hearing those call-outs from SpaceX, the Falcon 9 second stage has entered into its parking orbit. And we'll continue on in this coast phase until T plus 54 minutes 4 seconds, when it will have a 2-second burn, setting up for Starlink satellite deployment. That's coming up at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, 22 seconds. And with that, we want to thank a few more folks for their support this evening. Before we go ahead and close out our live launch coverage, we did get some support as we were trying to navigate around the SpaceX technical glitches, so certainly want to give folks their kudos for supporting our coverage this evening. Our thanks to Callisti Lee, one of our wonderful channel members, coming back with a very generous gift of 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. So if you were one of those lucky recipients, if you haven't already, be sure to thank her in the live chat. Linda Dietz with a $5 super chat saying, love the team who provides the coverage on this channel. Let's go SpaceX. Dave Shackett with a $5 super chat as well. Thank you, Dave. Who says, your coverage is really outstanding. Thank you so much. You're an incredible host. Oh, I really appreciate that, Dave. Thank you. Gonna go watch it outside from Tampa. Well, Dave, you'll have to let us know if you were able to see it from Tampa. Hopefully it was clear enough on the bay side of Florida that you were able to see it. Fingers crossed. Patty Mertz with a $5 super chat of support. Thank you, Patty. Cameron Plays with a $1 super chat. Thank you, Cameron. Cynical Cows with a $2 super chat saying, go Falcon, roll tide, baby. Got a lot of friends back in Alabama who I'm sure will appreciate that. Glenda Viethoff with a $2 super chat. Thank you so much, Glenda. Apologies if I mispronounced your last name there. Trident Ken joining us with channel membership at the mission specialist level. Really appreciate that, Trident. Thank you so much and welcome aboard. Channel member Nelson Reyes with a very generous $20 super chat. Thank you, Nelson. Good to see you again this evening. Saying thanks again for great coverage. Thank you so much for your support of it. Another one of our wonderful channel members, Valerie Jones, with a $5 super chat. Saying, did I understand there's another launch tonight? You did indeed understand that correctly. That is SpaceX's plan to launch the Starlink 7-12 mission from Vandenberg Space Force Base. Currently, as of right now, SpaceX is targeting 7:45 p.m. Pacific for that mission. That's 10:45 p.m. here on the East Coast. For our viewers joining around the world. That is, what, 02:45 UTC, I believe. So yeah, SpaceX going for the double header in the evening hours tonight. This launch slipping a little bit further into the window, so we'll continue to keep an eye to see if there are any additional adjustments. SpaceX does have backup opportunities in this West Coast window until 10:03 p.m. Pacific. So fingers crossed it doesn't shuffle too far back there. Don Pierce with a $2 super chat. Thank you so much, Don. Speaking of the West Coast, some West Coast love from my mom, Mary Robinson. Thanks for checking us out live, Mom. Hope you and our cat on the West Coast, Millie, had a good time enjoying this launch. Roseanne DeVasto with a $10 super chat saying, love the rumble on the river in Port St. John. Yes, certainly enjoyed it here at the press side as well. And our thanks as well to Robert B. for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Really appreciate that. Before we go ahead and sign off from this live coverage tonight, want to close out as we always do with an update on the mission stats now that this one is in fact in the books. This was the 18th flight of Falcon 9 booster 1062, the 293rd Falcon 9 launch to date. This was SpaceX's 8th Falcon 9 launch of 2024. Its 238th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was SpaceX's 8th orbital launch of 2024. Its 98th orbital launch in the last 365 days. We like to keep track of that rolling average, or that rolling total. This was the 74th SpaceX orbital launch from Pad 39A. and the 167th overall launch from this pad. SpaceX is closing in on having the launch title for Pad 39A. There were 82 shuttle launches and 11 Saturn V missions from this pad. So likely we'll see SpaceX overtake the shuttle total potentially by the end of this year. Moving on to the recovery stats, this was the 58th landing on the drone ship A Shortfall of Gravitas, the 209th landing on a drone ship to date, and the 267th Falcon booster landing in total. And finally, moving on now to the globe here. This was the 6th orbital launch from Florida this year, the 9th orbital launch from U.S. soil. This is also the 9th orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company. Looking at Rocket Lab to bump up that stat fairly soon with its first Electron launch of 2024. And this was the 19th orbital launch globally. For those who may not have been keeping close track, as sure, being the weekend, you had other more interesting things to do. We did have a launch from Iran earlier today, its first multi-satellite launch that went up early Sunday morning. That was orbital launch number 18. This being number 19, and if Vandenberg's launch is going to go forward tonight, that'll be orbital launch number 20. Looking at a slightly blown out countdown clock for orbital launch number 21, potentially. This will be, again, NG-20, or the launch of the Cygnus spacecraft, going up for the first time on a Falcon 9 rocket over at Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Of course, after Russia invaded Ukraine, began that war, it impeded Northrop Grumman's ability to get rocket parts from that part of the world, and so brought the end of the Antares 230 Plus rocket. Currently, Northrop Grumman and Firefly Aerospace are working on the Antares 330, a combination of vehicle parts from both companies, and that will be the future launch vehicle for the Cygnus spacecraft. Expected to make its debut, I believe, in 2025. Certainly keep an eye on its progress. But until then, there are 3 planned launches of a Cygnus spacecraft on board a Falcon 9 rocket. SpaceX had to make some adjustments to its payload fairing in order to allow for late loading of cargo onto the Cygnus spacecraft. So we'll look forward to seeing that launch. We have much more coverage to come. That mission again set to launch on Tuesday, the 30th at 12:07 p.m. Eastern. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close things out for our live coverage of the Starlink 6-38 mission. Want to thank our friends Pete Carstens, MaxQ Productions, as well as Chuck Briggs for helping to track this rocket tonight. A great clear view, and the strongish winds fortunately did not impede this launch from going off. Want to thank our wonderful moderators in the live chat for working hard to keep things kosher and allow for a lively, robust conversation, talking about this and other missions in the live chat there. Thanks to one of our photographers, Michael Kane, for hopping in the live chat, helping out as well as our Adam Bernstein, also working hard out here to track the rocket, do some still photography as well. Those are in process right now, so be sure to keep an eye out on their social feeds for launch photography from this and other missions moving forward. Again, these are their handles on X, so you can keep up with all of their work. Our thanks as well to our editor, Stephen Young, helping to run the technical aspects of the broadcast. Again, we apologize for the brief absence of SpaceX videos. We were getting into the final minutes of the count, but glad we got that back up and running and we're able to move forward without too much issue. So fingers crossed if the Starlink mission from Vandenberg goes forward tonight, that will be smooth sailing. I hope you'll knock on wood for us as we are here. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for taking some time from your Sunday evening to join us for what is potentially the first of 2 live launches on tap. I'm, of course, Will Robinson Smith, reporter for Spaceflight Now. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, be good to yourself, be good to others, and we will see you next time, hopefully very, very soon.